Ron, we're getting a little bit, it doesn't feel like it outside, but we're getting a little bit closer to spring. What are some of the things that as you travel across Western Canada, what are some of the things that growers are kind of going through right now in terms of seeding choices?
Well, I think you come to the point where there's some of the crops are standing out over others, and the commodity price is really driving that. Canola has been the talk of the town here for the last 18 months.
Continues to be.
Continues to be. Wheat's pretty sexy these days as well. Who'd ever thought we'd get $8 a bushel wheat? And that's a reality now. Barley has kind of become the weaker sister. Malt's always been a challenge. Feed barley market's down a little bit.
Where do you think malt fits right now? Like it's, there's been some, we're here at AgExpo, there has been some people inquiring about malt, but not a lot of, closing the trigger on malt. Like, is malt really struggling to kind of secure those acres?
I think the malt industry is struggling a lot in trying to secure the acres. There's a number of issues there, but price is a big driver.
Yeah.
I'm talking to some of the guys in the booths with the malt companies, and they really don't have a program that matches some of the other things that are other options that the grower has.
Mm-hmm. So, what about things like peas? What are you hearing from farmers in that regard?
Well, I think that depends on where you're from. I mean, there's areas, the traditional pea acre I think is still going to go in. There's an awful lot of areas that the peas got hit the hardest with the extreme moisture last year. So there's some of those, there's a lot of second guessing there. So what's that acre going to go to? Right now they're talking canola. Later on in the season, barley could come back in as an earlier maturing choice.
So how much effect do you think obviously there's a lot of snow. It's fairly wet when we moved into winter last year. How much effect do you think the possible water is going to have on seeding decisions?
Well, prior to us going live here, you mentioned the Red River Valley. Well, I live in Winnipeg. I think it's a foregone conclusion. We're going to be underwater. I can't imagine it not happening, and you'd have to be an awful slow melt for it not to be. We got all that water coming from the west and the south. Thank goodness for our floodway in Winnipeg, but what's that going to do to the farmer? He's going to be later seeding. But right there in the valley, those guys are pretty confident they'll get it seeded.
Yeah.
They've been dealing with it for a long time. I think the big concern is in a lot of areas in Western Canada. We're looking at a moisture map today, and Kindersley, Medicine Hat, record moisture. If they get a significant amount of rain, heaven forbid you're going to have trouble seeding because of too much moisture in Kindersley or Medicine Hat, right?
Do you think the high commodity prices right now, everyone still seems pretty optimistic around here?
Oh.
So the high commodity prices have kind of, sort of, everybody's still in a good mood even though it is so wet.
Yeah. Well, in my job I get to travel a fair bit, and the worst area hit last year in northeast Saskatchewan, those farmers are so optimistic. It's pretty cool. They're going to get a crop in, and they're very confident they're going to get a crop in. I hate to put them all in the same basket, but the optimism is really, really something. They say the big difference is most of the land got worked last year, whereas in the year before with zero-till, it just never had a chance to dry out. The options of top dressing weren't there, so I think they're going to be pretty innovative. This guy's making plans to do some pretty unique things.
Yeah, well, I think too with these higher commodity prices, I find a lot more farmers are booking further ahead. They're taking advantage of some of the strong prices and forward price contracts in a number of the different crops. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. From purchasing the inputs, the seed, fert, chem, all of that, as well as pricing further out, locking in some profit. So if they're locking in grain contracts, that's telling you they're pretty confident they're going to get something in the ground.
Yeah. What's funny though is we haven't, even though commodity prices are so high and there's optimism, we haven't heard a lot about expensive fertilizer.
I guess $12 canola and $8 wheat, the expensive fertilizer doesn't seem as expensive. That fertilizer price 3 years ago, like now we're back to close to where it was back then. That was all that people talked about. So.
Yeah.
It's more about revenue right now than it is than cost. And cost is always going to be part of the equation.
Right. But in the cattle market right now, higher price. We got record fat prices. Higher prices has not meant higher margins. Actually, in some cases, it's been negative margins. Right now in grain farming and oilseed farming, we've got high prices, but there is good margins there.
There's still some good money to be made. You betcha.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Ron, thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Sean. A pleasure.